Thank you very much, Stu. I'd like to start with some introductions, and maybe you can go around and perhaps if you have a burning question that you've come to the group with today. So we'll start in the front there. Go ahead.
I'm currently research track faculty in the dental school, but I've got several applications out for tenure track positions.
Fantastic. Okay.
I'm Setu. I'm one of the nephrology staff. Recently joined OSU, trying to build a research career. So I think this section would be greatly helpful.
Fantastic.
Matt Briggs. I'm part of the Department of Orthopedics and Ambulatory Rehab Services here in sports medicine.
Hi, I'm Kristen Gumper. I'm a graduate student, probably in the final year of a PhD in the Biomedical Sciences graduate program.
Great. Welcome.
I'm Ashley Setnar, one of the medical physicists in radiation oncology.
I'm actually part of the CCTS. I'm in the CRC, so I'm the A&D lab. So if you need any samples measured, come to me.
I'm Christina Gutke. I'm a research track faculty in the College of Pharmacy and on the job market for a tenure track position.
I'm Darian Mitchell. I'm a clinician scientist in the Department of Radiation Oncology.
Hi, I'm Bethany Leddy-Bossi, and I'm an assistant professor in the Division of Hematology.
My name is Amrik Singh. I'm a clinical scientist at Nationwide Children's in General and Academic Pediatrics, or Elementary Pediatrics.
Hi, I'm Isabel Menendez. I am a research scientist in the radiology department, and I'm actually doing this because I'm interested in the faculty startup package.
Steve Agumo, assistant professor in the Department of Pathology.
Karen Ross. I am assistant professor of tenure track, College of Nursing, and just trying to figure out what to do with the money.
Okay. We'll help. Come to the right place.
I'm Aaron Goldman. I'm an assistant professor in biological chemistry, and I'm here for the same reason.
Okay.
Michael Soriel, assistant professor in the Department of Urology.
Well, thank you, everyone. It's quite overwhelming here. Oh, we have another gentleman. What's your name? Morning. Okay. So basically, you've been given a startup package, and generally, maybe one pocket of funding, like the department funds, or it could also be sponsored project funds, or maybe a combination of the two. And really, managing your startup package really starts with setting a budget. You can combine your pockets of money or keep them separate, but generally you should probably keep them separate because there are important differences to keep in mind. Most notably, your sponsored projects will charge a facility and administration, F&A, or indirect cost rate. It's currently 56% here, though sometimes your award may have a lower rate. And this would be applied to all of your direct cost categories except your equipment, your tuition, sub-awards over $25,000. What is direct versus indirect? Direct costs are clearly identifiable costs related to a specific project, and indirect costs are overhead, facilities, administrative costs are expenses incurred in conducting or supporting research, but not directly attributable to a specific grant. It's like your operations management, libraries, utilities, lights, heat, and then your general and department administrative admin people such as myself, office supplies, etc. And basically your direct and your indirect costs equal the total cost of your project. And cost sharing, that's amounts either required or voluntarily offered to complete your project that will not be funded by your sponsoring agency. Voluntary cost share becomes Okay, thank you. It becomes mandatory if awarded. Cost sharing has to be tracked and reported and should be avoided whenever possible, as it does lower our university's F&A rate. So what is a good budget? It's complete, it's adequate to cover your complete scope of work, what's within the sponsor's norms. It follows both the sponsor and institutional guidelines. It's consistent with the narrative and clearly justified. Some questions to consider when you're creating your budget. Will you need to hire someone to help you conduct the research you're proposing? A research assistant, technician? What do you need to purchase and why? Are you required to travel to a specific conference as a condition of your award? Do you need to obtain some additional training? And are there any specialized laboratory services needed to conduct your research? Now, with personnel costs, you'll want to find your local human resource professional, as they will be the ones that end up appointing the person that you need. You'll want to start with a good, solid job description for that person, and you'll want to make sure that you yourself are appointed properly to the funds that you're to be and as appropriately budgeted. Another thing to keep in mind with personnel costs is that it's not just the salary amount that you're paying this person. There's also fringe rates, which currently for our faculty, researchers such as yourself, is 26.2% for the university and 26.8% for sponsored projects. And staff, it's around 33% for the university and 31.6% for sponsored projects. So just like a lot of things cost, well, not twice as much, but generally those are kind of hidden costs that you might not be thinking of just starting out. For your materials and your supplies, with all purchasing at OSU, you'll want to make sure that you have a good business purpose. You want to make sure your expenses are allowable, allocable, and reasonable. What would the prudent person say that you need, I don't know, 10 boxes of fringes, for when you only really need 10. With our purchasing here at OSU, we have lots of systems in place, and I'm sure you probably already find it overwhelming and crazy. But for your purchases, generally, erequest.osu.edu is where you would submit those, and you'll have your appropriate org and fund as given by your division admin or the sponsored projects office. And if that's the case, you, of course, would have a project, and it would be OSERF instead of UNIV. Of course, there's a wonderful supply center in the biological sciences building. It's a great internal supplier. You can get things in a quick hurry, and it's very convenient. You'll want to also, check with vendors. A lot of times they'll offer a new laboratory discount for the researchers just starting off or opening up their lab. A word of caution as far as making purchases yourself and expecting reimbursement, those really should be rare and not, they don't need to happen because we have such a wonderful purchasing system. And basically with our purchasing, there's just so many vendors. E-stores is fantastic to get a lot of your everyday supplies. And other costs you might not necessarily be thinking of, but maybe down the road, equipment, and that's defined as a year or more useful life, 5,000 or more in costs, and those orders would take a little bit longer oftentimes to purchase, and depending on how expensive additional paperwork and things would need to be filled. Plus, the vendor might have a lead time as far as getting that equipment to you. So, and travel, you want to make sure that that's related to your project and your research work, the specific benefit you would want to identify. Some awards might have restrictions against travel or to certain conferences, while some awards might require that you travel to a specific conference in order to accept your award. Just recently, all of our travel through the university needs to, well, our airfare anyway, needs to be pre-purchased through our corporate travel partners, or CTP for short. So you won't want to be booking your air and your ticket and expecting to get reimbursed for that, because they really need to do that on the front end before you go anywhere and request a travel number and such. Services, you might not be thinking of, like we have, as our university, we have over 30 shared resources, and Stu had mentioned a couple, and actually CCTS in the back, she did as well. Maybe you might need a poster. There's the Health Sciences Library. I don't know if you know, but they do that. And that's convenient on-campus service that's provided. And your animal costs, and that's another cost you might have. You might be doing some animal work, and you have your approved protocol, and a lot of young new researchers don't realize that how the per diem costs of your cages and things can really eat into your budget, and really, take a toll there. But you'll want to monitor your costs on your end, and eRequest makes it easy because you can kind of do a search with your name and have that. But if you're not as sophisticated, or if your department asks that you just submit orders to them directly and then they place them for you, you'll want to keep like a little tally or log. Pretty simple. It doesn't have to be anything. Just so you have a handle on your own costs. And you'll want to kind of check those against when you do receive your statements, and hopefully you do from maybe your grants manager on your end, or maybe a department administrator, or maybe both. Every department is different in how that is handled. And of course, grant managers such as myself, we're always here to help, and we want to see everyone do great things and connect people with the resources that we have here at Ohio State. Basically, your startup funds are so that you will go out and seek additional funding and get those proposals, and you'll want to build a strong collaborator network, for sure. In the Office of Sponsored Programs, they partner with our faculty and staff to provide wonderful research administration, high quality at all stages of your project. And there's many, many resources and training opportunities found on their website at osp.osu.edu. The Office of Responsible Research Practices, they provide education on OSU and federal research policies, and that's orrp.osu.edu. And compliance is orc.osu.edu. And I'm not sure if you heard of the Research Commons. That can be a valuable asset for all of you as well. They provide assistance with the writing, creating, data management, finding funding opportunities, which is fantastic at this stage. There are various research-related workshops and trainings that they have scheduled throughout the year. So does anyone have questions? I know that was kind of a lot of information as far as like your budget and kind of where to start, but if you have some specific questions, I'm happy to answer those. Anyone? Okay.
In your startup package, sometimes it's divided into like equipment versus, other funds or internships, et cetera. Is there crossover allowed between those?
Well, that would be maybe like a split purchase where you would use some of your department funds and then some of the equipment. I guess I'm not sure what you're asking. So it's separated out by equipment and then personnel and supplies?
Yeah.
I see. Well, that, I would ask the department administrator on that. I think if these supplies or what it is that you're needing more money than what was given under the equipment, or vice versa to move.
I'm just wondering if you get a pot and it's like, I don't know if these are like suggestions necessarily, or you have to keep it completely separate.
Gotcha. Well,
I can ask our administrator. I was just curious if that was like standard.
yeah, I mean, I think I've seen, if it's something that you're needing, like say you need additional funds from your budget with the personnel and materials and supplies and need more equipment, then the case can be made that you need to use those funds, or you need to use some of those funds for your equipment to complete the purchase. Yeah.
So early on, when you're starting up, you get a lot of these new faculty deals.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of them, the deal is better when you buy in bulk, but it's hard to know whether you should just buy what you need or take advantage of these deals because they do expire. Some of them after a few months, some of them after a year.
Mm-hmm.
But
and then certain supplies too might expire, so that's something to keep in mind. As far as your resources, your startup package, I mean, it is kind of finite resources. So I think if you're thinking that you would use all of the items within the time, then that might be a wise purchase. You might want to check with other researchers or collaborators that you might have, or your mentees. Maybe they might need the same product, and then maybe just split the purchase accordingly between how you would be using the item. I think that would be smart to do. Anyone else?
Question on hiring, and this might be college specific, I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm.
I understand that depending on what part of money you're using to hire, say like a graduate student, or not to hire, but to pay stipends for graduate students, you might be required to pay some part of tuition.
Mm-hmm.
Depending on whether it's NIH funding or not. Do you have any insights on that, or do you know if it's?
Well, it is college specific. A lot of times, I know the College of Medicine, they generally require the funding, the tuition anyway follows the funding. With sponsored projects, though, you're not paying the facilities and administration rate, so it's not as big of a hit to your sponsored project, in that you don't have that additional 56% charge on top of that. So it's kind of, I mean, I know in our college we cover tuition if the project is 56%, or the full F&A rate, because that's something that we're getting back, and we're able to communicate to our researchers that we support research that way. Well, it's more of the college, and it's T32s are a pretty big grant, and I don't have a lot of experience with them, but I think you would check with a coordinator, department administrator. I mean, I think if they were interested in having you as a part of that, because it's really a training program grant, so I think that might be how you would get involved.
T32s, they typically have a number of slots for different kinds of trainees, so they'll have a slot for like PhD students, they'll have a slot maybe for dual training, you know, MD PhD or BA PhD, that kind of thing. And so if you have a grad student come in who wants to be in your lab, then there basically has to be a spot open, or a spot coming open soon. Yeah, so you just have to kind of get on that and say, I need this spot, you know, that kind of thing. So, but yeah, so if there are no spots, then
You have to find out where they are, like who.
yeah. So just So there's typically, at least in our college, there's one administrator who runs the T32 program, and so you know there's you know the PI or multiple PIs of the T32, but then there's the person who actually administrates the whole thing. So that person is the person you really want to get to know and you know, see when slot, if all the slots are free, when slots might be coming up, or you know, sometimes they can do like a half slot, so you can like have two people in one slot and like you pay part and then the T32 will pay the other part. They might be able to work something out like that. So.
No more questions? Oh, go ahead. Oh, no, no questions, okay. I guess.
Could you address the issue of how aggressively you need to spend your startup funds? I know, like Shandon Sin used to talk to people to be, you know,
Well,
be careful about hoarding them. He always thought you should try and more. He leaned more to the idea of you should spend them and, you know, use them to get other funds and build your program and make sure. So how do you balance that? Being careful you don't run out of money.
well, I mean, that's a good point. I mean, with sponsored projects, of course, those funds generally expire. With the startup department funds, they generally don't expire. I mean, they may give you a 3-year limit or such, but generally, if you have a plan in place, you could extend those. But like what Stu said, I mean, really, it is a balance between spending what you need and then kind of preparing for. It can take longer to get your first R1 or, you know, a project. It can take twice as long and cost twice as much as far as getting the data that you need for that, for your opportunity.
Are there good tools that you suggest for, you know, we talked about a little bit on monitoring and cost. You know, I'm sure people commonly use Excel, but are there other good places or tools to use to monitor those costs in a way that you can share, you know, like sort of like cross-check easily? Are there templates that are available potentially off of the CTA website or other colleges that are you aware of?
I'm not sure if there are any on the CTSA website. I mean, I have some templates that I use over in the college that I'd be happy to send to you. You give me your email. With OSP, now that they've rolled out their new portal a few months ago, it's a lot easier now to basically export that into Excel and get a better report as far as your expenses, and you can sort it out as far as what you're purchasing and make some informed decisions as far as how much funds you have left and this planning.
Do people typically use something like Excel to manage or track those expenses besides, you know, or Golden Data or the other tools that people use?
I mean, typically I do see Excel a lot of times, you know, there's just like as a little system. I mean, your grant administrator might just send you like a e-report type PDF as far as your expenses that you've incurred. So it kind of can vary. So.
Any advice on equipment purchase? So for example, I use iPads for data collection, and you know, it's oftentimes you need quite a few at a time, but then you don't need it for a while and they get outdated. So is there perhaps, I know it may be school specific where there may be a repository, but is there, you know, like with the CCTS, is there a repository such as iPads that we would have access to use for data collection?
Well, with the university, I mean, we have a great arrangement and discounts through with the Apple products. So, but as far as purchasing several in advance, that wouldn't be recommended if they're going to be outdated. I mean, there's not a lot of lead time, I think, on iPads. Obviously, you would want to justify those for your data collection and make sure that, you know, if you need 10, you know, you have 10 people who are collecting the data and are using the iPad. Just be aware.
Is there a place, thinking about like all the costs, 'cause I know it can add up in terms of, you know, personnel costs, and you gotta add, you know, the fringe, and then thinking about sort of on a larger scale, FNAs and things like that. And I know those numbers tend to change, at least slightly, potentially, year to year, I believe. Is there a way that, you know, you can sort of know what those are? You know, is there a place where you can find those? Because I know, like, for myself at least, you know, we have a grants officer, but, you know, they're actually new to the position, so they are not as familiar with some of these things. And me kind of being the type of personality that I am, very cognizant, and I want to try to plan the budget, and, you know, I need to present it to, you know, my senior faculty. So I'm thinking about that. Is there a way to sort of, you know, see what those costs are so you can plan ahead?
The Office of Sponsored Programs, they have proposal development on their website as far as all the payroll costs and fringe rates, the current fringe rates, and as well as the FNA rates, and kind of see historically the last few years there. As far as the university, you could just search the fringe rate. It's through their HR website, so it would just be hr.osu.edu. And the thing with the university, their rates change September 1st, whereas OSP, they generally go in line with the fiscal year, and that's July. July is when those rates change. And they fluctuate not too much to, you know, take a big hit on your budget. You know, some go up, some go down, so it kind of evens out. Like, you know, using this year as an example for faculty, it was, you know, 23.2, and now it's 26.8% faculty. But whereas the university, it kind of went down to 23, and whereas it was 29.2. So it can be kind of confusing for sure. You know, especially when you're managing both pockets of money and what's the fringe for this and that, and that's where your department admin and your grant manager comes in handy for those questions. I mean, you should be primarily focused on your research, but yet you have to have the working knowledge, and that's why you're here to manage your funds and make sure that you're not, you know, I mean, it's really just common sense as far as, you know, having a budget and just kind of leveraging your support. Yeah, it's good.
You said those rates, they post them at different times, but are they the same rate? So it'll be,
No.
are the different fringe rates from sponsored program reflecting their negotiations with funders as opposed to the university?
Right, right. The university fringe rate, they changed September 1st, and that's along lines with our normal faculty and staff increases. But then the sponsor programs, it's in July with our normal OSU fiscal year. So I'm not really sure why we're not on the same schedule with that, but keeps you on your toes as far as budgeting purposes.
But those rates will eventually be the same? Or
No,
are they different?
this year though, they did do a pool between like if you needed civil service and administrative and professional type researcher. They're both now the same rate, whereas they used to be different. So. Other questions or comments? I think I should have prepared to talk a little bit more about that. I mean, really, managing startup, it's just have your budget and kind of revise as you go and collaborate. Collaborate. That's a way to save costs. Maybe one lab that your mentee needs a researcher and you need them for maybe only 5 hours a week, and maybe you can work something out like that.
What do you typically find with researchers and the time frame in which they use their startups, in your experience?
Yeah, generally it's a couple years. I'll see maybe they'll get a K award or the K award. You guys have K, but then it'll take them a couple of years before they get their R1. As far as using these funds, it really a lot depends on your mentee. I mean your mentor. And how helpful they can be to you, and as far as getting you up and running, on your own and be independent. We have to have more questions. Okay.
Any tips on what not to do with our startup funds?
Well,
I've heard some far-fetched things.
yeah, I mean, you wouldn't be purchasing lunches for your research staff, and anything that you're wanting to purchase with your startup funds, you'll want to have a clear business purpose. Why are you doing this, and you don't want it to be on the front page of the newspaper. So like what kind of far-fetched things have you heard?
Well, I thought it was anyways. Memberships, so professional organization memberships, which is something that we just have to do, right?
Yeah. Well, those a lot of times can be justified on your startup funds. They wouldn't be justified on your sponsored project funds, though, because that's something that would benefit multiple things. It wouldn't really benefit your project.
A lot of those times you can get that money back because you get discounts at conferences.
That would be one way how you could potentially justify on a sponsored project if it was less than, like if traveling to the conference required you to become a member, for that membership rate.
just see leave for tenure.
Sure did.
But I just can't stress enough, though, that there are so many resources for you all, you know, with the Office of Sponsored Programs and just even the university and our strategic buying power, you know, as far as for making your laboratory purchases. And it makes things easy. You get your things quicker. I was hoping that you'd have a lot more questions to. Is there something that you thought that you would get out of this session that you haven't? Is there, I mean, I don't want you to leave here, you know, coming in and saying, well, I didn't learn anything, or I don't know.
How do you come up with the budget?
Well, as you want to think realistically as far as, generally your personnel expenses are the most costly. So just thinking realistically of what it is that you're wanting to accomplish, obtain data for that grant proposal, you know, just that's where I would start with the personnel, and just thinking realistically as far as the effort and the time that's required. And then I would think about, well, what supplies do I need as far as to conduct the research, check with the resources in, you know, college or department area as far as cost savings. Think about equipment, travel. It's easier than you think, I think, once you sit down and think of what it is you're proposing and the time and effort that it takes. And your supplies and equipment, travel, yeah.
Kind of piggybacking off of that, like what is the typical percentage breakdown that you typically see? Like is it like 50% personnel, 10%, I don't know, administration fees? Like what do you typically see that you find successful?
Well, generally I see maybe 70, 30, you know, personnel. 70% and materials and supplies and services for that other 30%. As far as if they're sponsored project funds, then you know that 56% is on top of all those cost categories, except the tuition and subawards over 25,000, which that would be great to have a subaward. Kristen?
Is there somewhere to go so you know like how much, you know, a salary is for, you know, an entry-level technician versus a senior person? You know, so you can understand what those salary differences are? Is that through HR?
Through the HR, or you can talk to your human resource personnel. I mean, we have ours on maternity leave, but there's just a general range and of all the titles at OSU, and they can
That includes
send that
kind
to
of
you.
the job description too, so you can see what you would be getting for that position.
Absolutely, that's a good strategy too. I mean, if you're not sure if it should be a research assistant or a research associate, but generally they have, you know, more education requirements and specialization with the associate versus like a lab technician. Like, what are you actually having the person do, and whether it warrants that higher job title. Anyone else?
there generally time limits for startup funds? Like, let's say you get a grant right away, or you end up, co-investigating on a bunch of other grants. And, you don't necessarily need to spend all of your startup right away. And can you keep that typically for a long period of time, or is there a time limit where you just spend?
Yeah, I mean, generally they'll give you a time limit, but you could always, I don't know, appeal sounds like a strong word for that, but you could basically propose that you have these funds longer and maybe have a budget for what you plan to do for that additional time. So then that way your department is satisfied with that you're going to spend these funds eventually, but you just need a little bit more time and longer, you know. So always ask, I think, never hurts to ask. Go ahead.
So everyone else in the room might know the answer to this, but for the startup funds and packages, is it typically the same for each researcher, or is there like a wide variation? And by same, I mean like within, a range, I guess.
I would imagine there's it's similar but different as far as it depends on the different pools of funding, like whether you have the sponsor project funds, and then the department funds. But are you talking about a dollar amount?
Yeah, just like what I don't really know like what range of dollars we're working with here. Like, are we talking about tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars? Like
millions? No, I'm just kidding.
Well, no, I mean,
That would be great.
I'm a PhD student, right? So all of this is kind of hidden, and I'm just trying to learn a little bit more about like what the next step is going to be and what that looks like.
I see. What? Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's negotiated when you try to get the job. So my department hired 6 faculty this year, and I'm sure that not every one of us got the exact same dollar amount. It's all negotiated, how badly do they want to get you? How are they paying for you? So in some cases you might be split between 2 departments, and one may have more money or resources. And you might even bring in your own money through a career award. So you might just have more even if you're given the same dollar amount. But I'd say that generally people don't talk about it because of that, because you don't want to have your your coworker and friend, you find out that they got more or less than what you got, and so that the dollar, that's why people generally don't talk about the dollar numbers, because they don't want to create any sort of conflicts and things of that sort. But it's all negotiated.
I'd also add that it depends on which level you're coming in at, whether you're an assistant professor, associate, or full professor. It just depends, and typically, at least in my case, it's split over a certain amount of years. So you can get it just for the 1 year, you can get it over 2 or over 3 years. So it just all depends.
Well, often the department that's hiring you, during the hiring process, they'll ask for a proposed budget. So they'll say like, how much do you need and why do you need it? And so a friend of mine just accepted an offer, and they wanted it detailed, like, I need $20,000 for this microscope. I need this, that, and the other, and then that's kind of ends up being the starting point for negotiation.
Okay.
And like I said, it can be influenced by what money you're bringing in. If oddly enough, if you have a lot of money, they're more likely to give you more money. So that's definitely going to be influencing things as well. But honestly, the actual amounts, and so for 250 is usually a decent starting place for a lot of at least biomedical science. If you're doing like intensive research, intensive biomedical research that requires lots of equipment or sample collection or data processing, that kind of stuff. But really your best option is to talk to your, advisor or someone else in your department who, when you're actually going and applying for jobs, especially if they know the department or the people and the institution you're applying for, they can give you a better idea of what a good minimum is. It's like, don't accept anything below this, because then they're just trying to, get you for a discount. And also you have to consider, again, like she's saying with the budget, and that's why they often ask you for a budget ahead of time, but you need to have an idea of what you need to get your next grant, because that's really what the startup is for. Is how much money do you need to get you where you're trying to go.
Especially, specialized equipment, that's really what kind of gets people some more dollars. There's
Yeah.
like a specialized microscope or instrument that you need that isn't available, or you don't want to have to share, even though it may be in the shared resource. You're going to be using it so much, you want to have it. I think in general, startup package, like there's a base package, and then there's just some negotiation that happens based on specialized equipment needs and then salary.
Okay.
Also, if you're running a mouse lab, you might spend another $100,000 a year just keeping up your mice, and so they take that into account, and you have to negotiate it. But if you have a mouse lab and a fly lab, it's not exactly
Right.
fair. Well, fair is not the word, but it's not. It makes more
Costs
sense.
are very, very different.
The costs are different, so you might get more money, but it's not really more money.
Thank you, everyone, thank you.
That's good. Well, there's no more questions, then I guess this concludes this session. So enjoy the rest of your day. And again, thank you for attending.